Good evening. My name is Joseph Sipitz. I'm here for the St. Joseph County Public Library, and it's time for another Saturday night story. And tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. It is after midnight, so it's time for a story. I'm going to be reading from Ghostland, American History and Haunted Places by Colin Dickey. And I'm here in the house that my parents bought in 1975. Over that way is the room where I lived in the basement during my high school years. Over there's the train set that my father built from scratch. A little bit further over that way is his workbench. Behind me over this way are family photos, 80 years of family photos. I have over here a photograph of my great-grandmother, Rosalie, who died almost 100 years ago. Not quite, maybe 90 years ago. So what is it precisely that makes for a haunted house? I'll be reading from the first chapter called Anatomy of a Haunting. I think it gets at what it is that makes for a haunted house. August 1933, a summer's day at Manhattan's Lower East Side. There are children playing outside on East 4th Street. They are wild, they are shouting and roaming the streets and trying to gather up the last of the season before the fall sets in. There is nothing unusual about any of this. Then the door swings open on 29 East 4th Street, and an old woman emerges onto the stoop overlooking the street, wildly waving her arms and shouting to the children to be quiet. The children and adults all recognize her, Gertrude Treadwell, who's lived in the house for more than 90 years. Born there in 1840s, 5 years after her father purchased it. The children, quiet, turning toward the high staircase that leads to Gertrude's front door, looking up with fear at the old woman who, satisfied, returns indoors and shuts the door. There's nothing unusual about any of this except that Gertrude Treadwell has been dead now for several weeks. It's not the last time Gertrude Treadwell will be seen at the house on East 4th Street. In the months after her death, the house falls into the hands of a distant cousin. Since by now most of the old merchant houses on the lower Manhattan are gone, he decides to preserve the house as a museum, first opening it to the public in 1936. Over the years, there are dozens of sightings of odd and inescapable things happening at the house. In the early 1980s, tourists come across the house and ring the bell. A woman in period costume tells them plainly that the museum is closed for the day and could they please come back at another time. Later, when they call the house and get the hours, they are told that the museum was in fact open and they had come by, and that furthermore, none of the staff ever dresses in period costume. Gertrude also has been seen inside the house, sometimes haunting, sometimes humming, sometimes playing the piano, always appearing as a frail, petite woman in period costume. Nor is she alone. A visitor to the house in the summer of 1995 claimed that while upstairs she had a lengthy conversation with an older gentleman in a tattered suit, a heavy wool jacket smelling of mothballs, who talked to her about what the house and was like to live in. After listening to him for 5 minutes, she turned away for a moment, and when she looked back, he was gone. Later, she identified the man she had seen in photographs, Samuel Lennox Treadwell, Gertrude's brother, who had died in 1921. Okay. The Merchant Houses Museum in Lower Manhattan has stood alone against the din and rush of the city. It has stood for 180 years and might stand for many more. Within, walls continue upright, bricks meet neatly, wood floors give gently underfoot, and spirits gather. The house was bought by Seabury Treadwell in 1835 when he retired. Owner of a large hardware firm, he had 8 children altogether, and the last of whom, Gertrude, was born there in 1840, when Treadwell was 60. Gertrude never married. She had had one suitor, and her father disapproved of his Catholicism, and so she lived out her life in the house on 4th Street, her siblings dying out one by one until only she remained. Over time, she focused her energies on keeping the house exactly as Seabird had intended it, maintaining its 19th century charm until she died at the age of 93 in 1933. Her cousin turned the house into a museum, and the ghosts, they say, came quickly after. The Merchant's House is a prime example of a grand old American haunted house. Its exterior is stately refined with a touch of frayed elegance. Its front door welcomes even as it seems to be hiding something. Inside, the floors creak without warning, without any sense of someone there. The old wood is thick and with humidity, and the walls and floors still breathe. It's the oldest brownstone in New York, with the furniture of its original owners still intact. All around it are gleaming glass and steel towers of the modern age, bustling with life still being lived. It is easy to feel as if you're stepping back in time when you walk the steps of those long gone. And it's easy in such a house, a well-worn house, to feel like something is not quite right, an invisible presence, a trace of something that doesn't belong. Through the years, guests have reported feeling cold spots or seeing strange wispy streaks of light, some of which have been captured on film. Paranormal researchers have conducted EVP, electronic voice phenomena, sessions in the house, turning on a tape recorder and asking questions to an empty room, playing back the tape later in hopes that the ghosts will have answered back. Several EVPs from the house have recorded bits of faint, muddled noise that some claim are voices speaking from beyond. But these events alone are easy for a skeptic to brush aside and discount. A paranormal event without a story is tenuous, fragile. What makes it real, at least in a sense, is the story. The tale that grounds the event, the sense of the uncanny, the something not quite right, of things ever so slightly off, cries out for an explanation, and often we turn to ghosts for that explanation. Just as an oyster turns a speck of dirt into a pearl, the ghost story doesn't make the feeling disappear. It can transform it into something more stable, less unsettling. Long before haunting became associated with ghosts, it meant simply to frequent, in a way that teenage kids haunt a park or a drunk haunts a bar. A house like Merchant's House Museum is haunted then by use and by habitude, by grooves worn into the floors and walls, as though you could map out the daily patterns of the people who live there by analyzing the signs of wear. The ghosts of the Merchant's House emerge not only out of the uncanny feeling we get from creaking wood and antiqued architecture, but also from the stories about the one-time inhabitants that are told and retold over the years and embellished when necessary to heighten the drama. Tales of Gertrude emphasize that she never married, that after her father died or disapproved of her only suitor, she promised him she'd stay single and live in his home. The spinster who honored her father's wishes even after death. Gertrude seems tragic, bordering on the pathological. Even before her death, she haunted this house. An emotionally stunted recluse, unable to let go of her attachment to her father. Her brother Samuel, by contrast, was described as a black sheep, one who never amounted to much and was disinherited by the family. This is a tad unfair. Samuel followed in the father's footsteps as a merchant, specializing in china and crockery, though he was not the success his father had been. He had, indeed, been written out of Seabury's final will, mainly due to the debt Samuel had incurred in the wake of the Civil War. Seabury, instead, left a trust to Samuel's daughter's name. But the legends of the Merchant's House exaggerate the tensions of the family drama, relying on melodramatic caricatures. The sight of Samuel's ghost is far more exciting and menacing, after all, if he has come back from the grave to claim his rightful inheritance. A spinster, and one who seemed to resist time and place, as restless as New York City, Gertrude Treadwell embodies a set of ideas and anxieties about women, domesticity, and modernity. Likewise, in The Ghost of Threadbare Samuel Treadwell, we have a story of a disinheritance and a filial failure that reflects on how we as a culture treat men who don't live up to certain concepts of masculinity. Add to this the overbearing portrait of Seabury himself, and what The Merchant's House offers is an uncanny portrait of an American family, one that frustrates our basic assumptions about how a father and his children should act. Instead of, or perhaps in addition to, the supernatural, old buildings are haunted by their memories, memories of those who had inhabited them, and the memories we bring to them. We are conditioned, after all, to conflate memory and physical space. At the same time that Pliny was writing his tale of Athenodorus's haunted house, Cicero and Quintilian were developing a technique of remembering great quantities of information known as memory palace. Rather than memorizing information directly, one imagines a house and places different in it in different rooms. With a speech, for example, one's first point is placed at the entryway to the home, the second point in the first room, and so on. To remember the speech, the orator simply has to walk through the house and in her or his or her mind, picking up on each aspect of the speech as she moves through the building. The technique suggests a degree to which memory is spatial, or at least primed to work spatially. Our brains are hardwired to think in terms of place and to associate psychic value or meaning to the places we inhabit. Just as imaginary houses may be used to help us remember things, real physical houses may have had their memories, or at least memories we project onto them. A haunted house is a memory palace made real, a physical space that retains memories that might otherwise be forgotten or might remain only in fragments. Under the invisible weight of these memories, the habits of those who once haunted these places, we feel the shudder of the ghost. Good night.